Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, joined by my colleagues.
Chris Connolly here. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Lainey Mays.
We're happy to be here with you, and you're glad you're here with us. So we have two really interesting authors who are going to talk to you today about their books. We have LaTanya McQueen and Kaia Alderson. And Kaia Alderson's got a historical debut fiction, Sisters in Arms, a novel of the daring Black women who served during World War II. We're going to hear from her in a little bit. Right now, we're going to hear from Latonya McQueen, whose book, When the Reckoning Comes, will blow your hair back. So I'm going to step back and have Lainey take it away.
Okay, well, we're going to switch. And so, Kaia, we'll see you in a second. All righty. Well, hi, LaTanya. It's so nice to see you again because we did the podcast together and that was super fun. And I hope that after this, people go and listen to that and get a little bit more of a deep dive. But I so enjoyed talking to you for that. So thank you. And your book is just, like she said, blow your hair. It's one of my favorites of the season. It's just such a great read. And I'm gonna talk about you for a minute and tell them a little bit about you, and then we'll get to the book. Okay.
Okay.
So Latonya McQueen has an MFA from Emerson College, a PhD from the University of Missouri, and was a 2017-2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writer Fellow at Cornell College. Currently, she's an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Coe College, and she published an essay collection titled And It Begins Like This, and has been featured in Best American Essays, Carve Magazine, and Bennington Review. When the Reckoning Comes is your debut novel, so big congrats on that. Very exciting. And yeah, maybe we can talk about being a debut novelist in a little bit, but first I want you to tell them about When the Reckoning Comes. So what's it about and what can they expect?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess in terms of synopsis, is a book centered on Mira, who is a Black woman who, it's her and her two friends, Jesse, who's a Black man, and then Celine, who's a white woman. And it is about these three friends who grew up in a small North Carolina town, and the sort of, I guess, racial tension between the three of them. Mira, in the present day, the book is centered around Mira, and she gets, and it's set in present day, and she gets a phone call from Celine, right, her childhood friend, to attend her wedding. So they were childhood friends, and they lost contact, and so now she gets this call to come back to the wedding of her friend. And the wedding is being held on this plantation that has been renovated to be to provide guests with this antebellum-esque experience. And so the book, the plot of the book is centered on her coming back, and she's coming back to this wedding, but she's also coming back to get reacquainted with Jesse, and the discord that happens between the three of them when she comes back on the setting. It's a supernatural. It's part supernatural, part thriller, part horror. A couple other things to know about this book. In Mira's past, when they were all children, in this past experience, both her and Jesse, based on a kind of like whim, they break into this plantation because it's rumored to be haunted, like it's kind of like a childhood ghost rumor. And so because of that, they break in and they may see some things that has affected both of them. So that's in the past, and in the present, she's coming back amidst this sort of past experience, if that makes sense. In terms of themes, it's a story I was really interested in. I would describe this book as a book about the white gaze and the way in which it can affect a person's sense of self for all of these characters. So how they are seen, and how the ways in which they're seen, how other people see them, and how that affects how they think of who they are. So that's kind of what the book is about.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack with this book, and not only is it like two timelines, you're dealing with like stuff that happened in the past, but they're really like Jesse and Mira have not spoken about what happened. So they're like also coming to terms within this greater wedding setting. Did you want to write about plantations from the beginning? Like, where did the idea come from?
That's a good question. I wrote another book. I wrote an essay collection, and I was struggling with some of my own family history. I have an ancestor who lived on a plantation, worked on a plantation of a really well-known senator in North Carolina. And so in trying to kind of understand her life, I was trying to understand larger plantation systems at large. And so as part of that, I went and I toured a bunch of them across the country. So I toured some in South Carolina, North Carolina, and then also too in Louisiana. And I found when I went to these places that I went to kind of think about my own family history, and when I went to these places, I discovered that the history that I wanted to know about was erased, really, and they were telling a different type of story, and I couldn't let that go, and so another part of this book, I guess one of the motivations for this book also too was thinking about the ways in which we erase history, right? Or we revise it to fit particular narratives, and ignoring things that our country doesn't really talk about race, right? And we erase it from history. And so I wanted to center a book on that too. So that's kind of sort of where the idea came from.
Yeah. And I think that with as someone from the South, plantations and especially like renovations on plantations are very important, and they're something that I have to be honest wasn't discussed, like you're saying, like until I was out of the South. And so like, what does that mean? Like if we're erasing all of this history? And I think it's interesting in the book that when she visits all of the like, it's not like a museum, but all of the things that have been set up to remind them of the history, it's very whitewashed. So can you tell them about like what she experiences?
Yeah, so and it's when I wrote that chapter, it was difficult for me because I did not know, I wanted to walk a line between it feeling realistic and sort of, is this too far? But a lot of those things are, it doesn't. So she goes there and she finds out that there are reenactments happening of some of the antebellum era life, and so she gets caught up in like the reenactment scenes, and which is also too, it's like an element that if you go to some of these places, they do have, right? They do have these types of reenactments. When I went, I experienced some of them. There are things like it's built in a way to be very like commercialized and performative. So you can go and then you see there's places where you can rent cottages, and then you can there's a bar, and there's where you can get drinks and like mint juleps and things like that. And then you look out and you can see these slave cabins that have been they're slave cabins, but they have been they're shown in a way to seem not as bad, right? There's I don't know, there's a one, like a kind of place where you can sing your own holler song, right? So like it's difficult. It was a difficult section to write. It was difficult chapter to think about, because again, like it's a lot of what I wrote are things that things that all these places actually do. The dress and costumes, right? That's in the book. So like this performative antebellum display, right? So that's sort of what's happening. She goes back to her hometown, and then she goes and she sees this place, and this is what it's become, and with no acknowledgement really of what built it.
Right. Yeah. And I have to say, yeah, it's not off the mark at all, because those things really do happen. And I think that's also something interesting to discuss too, is like some of the things, like the historical things that come up, or like when she's experiencing things with these ghosts, like I had to like shut the book. I was like, that can't be real. And then look it up and you're like, oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
was real. And that's like the terrible horror of it, is that it was real. And how do you, I mean, I could be wrong, so correct me, but I don't think you started off it being in your mind as a horror novel, right? Or did you? Okay. So how do you feel about it being called a horror novel?
Yeah, that's I it's interesting because that's not how I see how people think of it, right? Like, and I get it. But that wasn't my inclination when I was writing it. I was trying to write from a place of truth. Most of the experiences and the scenes, like even the really violent ones, like they come from some element of truth. And so for me, I was thinking of it in terms of like history. But I see, right? Like I see how it's thought of as horror. But you know, for Black people, Black history, a lot of it is one of horror. So yeah, so.
Speaking of horror, I mean, the scene, it's relatively early on when she passes the prisoners working in the fields and they're in the old fashioned prison stripes, which was an intentional move. Could you talk about how this all plays into that and what that scene's doing?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, right, that for me, this is a book about the white gaze and how it affects a person's sense of self, right? For Mira is a person who she has been taught to believe that if you look a certain way, if you behave a certain way, if you do like particular things, that you will be absolved from experiencing maybe the same amount of racist acts as other minorities would. So that's sort of her mentality, and that's what she's been taught. And a part of what happens early on in the book, like she's going back to her hometown, she's going to this wedding, but like she's a teacher and she's had this interaction with a student where she has misjudged him, and she saw him in a particular way without really thinking, and misjudging him basically. So she's thinking about that among other things, and missed trying to drive home, and then she has she sees the prisoners, right? And so part of what I was trying to do, well, a couple things. Part of what I was trying to do is show the link, like making historical connections to the present day, right? The way in which Black people have been treated with that scene, but also too, like she trying to kind of illustrate a little bit more, right? Like part of what Mira's interaction with the student that she had, and part of how she acts with Jesse, is she fears that both of them having the same fate. So that's why it's upfronted in the book. And then a large part of her own trajectory is realizing that it doesn't matter, right, how you're seen. It doesn't matter how people see you. It doesn't matter what you do. Like, people are going to see you how you see you, and it's more about how you see yourself, and being and accepting that.
That's yeah, there's, as Lainey and Chris have both said, the book packs so much. You can really go in either direction. So I think it's very interesting that you say, well, I didn't really think of it as writing horror, that people are perceiving it that way, but indeed, you know, the whole subject is horror. Well, we have comments and questions, so we'll go to a couple of those if we can. Don't be afraid. Vicky Nesting says, it's a comment: thank you for writing this book. It really brought home to me the horrors of plantation weddings more than anything else I've read. And living on the German coast of Louisiana, I have seen and read a lot. Lady, wasn't Vicky the person who said to you, we need to talk?
Yeah, we had an offline conversation about historically, like slave revolts and things like that, and so she gave me some recommendations too. Yeah, she thought the book was so wonderful to have those conversations.
And Maureen Roberts from Baltimore says, you write fiction and nonfiction. Do you have a preference? And how does your process differ in writing between fiction and nonfiction?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Do I have a preference?
Mm.
I don't know. I think it's interesting. I always thought of myself as a fiction writer, and then I turned to nonfiction somehow as a way. I had question. I think the difference for me is that with nonfiction, I'm usually trying to answer a particular question, and nonfiction is a way to for me to do that, right? To explore that in a way that I can't do with fiction. With fiction, my approach is to think about, to try something that I haven't done before. So my writing, my stories and stuff, like they're sort of all over the place in terms of genre and aesthetic. So I guess that's the difference for me. I don't know if I prefer one or the other. They're I don't know. I don't think I have a preference. They're just two forms for different ways for whatever I'm trying to kind of think about or do at the time.
Is there a do you have a different emotional, I don't know, release, or is there a, like when you're done speaking about fiction and nonfiction, is there a difference for you as far as when you're done? You know, like, oh, can't believe I got that done, and I can't believe the response has been this, and you know, going back to the horror, is there a difference in your experience when it's over and looking back? I'm curious about that. You know what I mean?
It, I think with nonfiction it can be more cathartic, but it depends on the thing. Nonfiction oftentimes, right? I think it's a way to get, or for me at least, I think it's a way to get at trauma in a way that I wouldn't be able to do with fiction. So it can be a release in that regard. But I tend to also be, I just did a talk on this, I tend to be very distant too, in nonfiction in a way that I'm not. So I don't know. Gosh, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about it. I'm usually motivated by a question, right? And so like I wrote an essay collection and I was trying to figure out, I had this ancestor who she was a slave to this senator, and she had this relationship with this white man on a neighboring farm. She had all these kids with him, and she was able to take him somehow to court or something to make sure that one of the children had his surname, which was this really rare thing to have happened. So my family has this name that shouldn't be their name. And part of what I wanted to do was to think about like how this happened, and to connect it back to the ways in which my own family has their own issues in terms of race, and how they see themselves. So I had that sort of question. In terms of this book, the novel I was thinking about, it was kind of a continuation, I guess, on like how Black people see themselves and how that's affected by how white people see them in all these different ways. And so, and I didn't really have a question, and I just had this idea, and I wanted to kind of think about how this would present itself in a narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting. I just I know of somebody, I don't actually know these people, that just went down to have a plantation wedding, and like your destination wedding was this plantation, and I with no connection at all, and it was a man and a woman, and the man is African American. I thought, what is happening? I understand it.
Yeah, it's, I think it's terrible. Like, I think the one thing you have to understand is with these places, these strip it of history, right? So for others, they're not thinking of it as this place where there was mass murder, right? Like they're thinking of it, you go to these places and it's like, oh, this beautiful house with these owners who, like the people who used to own this house, they were so wealthy and they were great because they were wealthy. And let's talk about how great they were and their furnishings. And let's talk about the architecture of the house. And I think people go to these places and they want to have these weddings at these places because it's like a symbol of wealth. It's a symbol of what the want to be in terms of status, like it's a status thing.
Mm.
And that's how they're thinking of it, and that's how these places projected to be. So I mean, if you go and you completely erase it of what these places were, then I guess, for them, it is a great experience, because it's just a beautiful house with beautiful grounds, and that symbolizes wealth. But they erase the history. And I went to Louisiana, and a lot of these places, especially Louisiana plantations, they were really horrible living conditions. Black people had a high mortality rate. It was rough. And once you realize that, and then you go in the summer and you feel the heat and you feel the oppression of it, it hits you.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for me. It was difficult for me to go. I think one of the hardest parts for me was to go, and there were a lot of international people who'd come, and this is what they're being presented with in terms of American history, this completely revised, whitewashed version of the past, right? And so that was one of the things that was hard to think that, some people are coming here to learn, and this is what they're getting. But.
Yeah. God. It's staggering. It really is. Think about it. I mean, just obviously they're not thinking about it. They don't want to think about it. I don't know. Okay. Do we have other questions? Christopher Laney, our clock is ticking.
Well, yeah, and I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit, because you did speak about your nonfiction and, the sort of release that you might get from that versus a book like this, where these issues are still here. They're still just as pressing. 2020, we had, the reemergence of Black Lives Matter. I mean, is this something where you have this book, it's about to be published. Are you eager to return to fiction then? And do you, at what point do you send a book off and you feel like it is done and you've said what you need to say, versus when you need to revisit and would you return to horror again? I know that's kind of a
I'm trying to with another book, right? And then so it's still in the early stages, so it's yes, as well as I always try to do both simultaneously. I always have a multiple things kind of going on, but yeah, I'm doing another novel I think that'll probably be more literary horror, but similar themes. And this other one is going to be centered on children again, in a home. That's about as much as I can say about it, but yeah, I am returning to horror.
That's intriguing. We have a question from Casey Davis. That might be the last one it's actually not a question. It's just more of a commentary on what we're talking about. She says, and yet the concentration camps are what they are. So it's horrifying for our country to continue to suppress this history.
Yeah.
Right. True. Now, so where are we? Where are we on our time with our 2 minutes left and our Jennifer Winbury?
We have an all-encompassing question that might take more than 2 minutes, but we can ask it. And maybe if we don't get to it, LaTanya, you can write to her. She graciously, LaTanya said she would go back to the Facebook comments and write, but I'm going to read it. Let's see. So our friend Jennifer Winbury said, fascinated by ghosts and our past. There are so many ghosts in this novel, ghosts from long ago and ghosts from Mira's not so distant past. What can these ghosts teach us? And do you think we must all face our ghosts in the past before we can live our best lives?
I don't want to put you on the spot with this because we ran this by before, but honestly, it's obviously such an open-ended question and anybody's interpretation of that, but we'll let that be the last thought for your part, LaTanya, and anything you want to speak to that subject.
I would say that we are all haunted by America's past, whether we want to admit it or not, right? And we all have to grapple with it in one way or another, right? And in a lot of ways, that's what this book is about. So was very, very condensed.
Well, it's also a good thinker, you know, like if you're going to discuss this in a book club, that's a good question to do. So thank you, Jennifer. That was a really wonderful question. And I just, before we go, wanted to point out that you have a wonderful website, LaTanyaMcQueen.com, that they can see all of the nonfiction that you've written, all of the things published, and probably my favorite blog of all time, which is when you click it, it says, haha, sorry, I don't blog. It's my favorite. So you guys can go to her website and see all of her writing. So please do that.
We could put that in the chat too,
Yeah.
so that people can just go right to it. So yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, LaTanya.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. And thank you for writing this book. It's important, and it's quite the page turner. And it does make one think. It's really very powerful. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today about this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure. So we have, let's see, that is When the Reckoning Comes, and August 3rd, 2021. It's on sale. And we look forward to, we'll be hearing lots more about this book for sure. So that's going to be pretty powerful.
Thank
So
you.
be well, and we will say goodbye to you for now. We hope our paths cross again.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you all for having me, and thank you all for coming. So bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
LaTanya.
LaTanya. That was great. Oh my God.
Kaia is coming back. Yeah, and there's so much love and quotes, but I didn't even get to that for the book. Megan Giddings, I know we were talking about that before. She has a wonderful quote.
Yeah. Great. Huge raves. If you go to Edelweiss and you pull up When the Reckoning Comes, there's quotes and quotes and quotes, and a wonderful author's note, which she touched on a bunch of stuff already today, but it's really worth going to the page to read it, because there's a great back history there and talks about the white gaze, and really so informative and very reflective and touching. So definitely check that out. Hi, Kaia.
Hi, Virginia.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I am not going to take up any airtime. I'm turning this over to Mr. Chris Connolly, who's going to do the honors of introducing you.
Yes, an honor it is. Thank you, Kaia, for being here. I'm going to read your bio. You are a historical fiction, historical women's fiction author with a passion for discovering hidden figures in African-American women's history. Your specific areas of interest are women's military history, popular music, women in sports, upper middle class African-American society, and women's international travel. You hold a sociology degree from Spelman College and a master's of education degree from the University of West Georgia. You're an alumna of such respected writer workshops as the Hurston Wright Foundation, Voices of Our Nation, Callaloo, and The Second City. And Sisters in Arms is your debut historical fiction coming August 3rd. There is a lot to talk about with this, but just to head things off, would you mind introducing our viewers to Sisters in Arms?
Sure. Would you like me to read from it?
Oh,
Yes, we very much would.
Yeah. Okay, I just
yes,
saw it.
I was
Okay,
new about.
sure. I will go ahead. I'm reading from fairly early in the book, and one of the main characters, Grace, is it's the tail end of her very bad day, as I like to put it succinctly. And she was supposed to have something that she was working towards happen earlier in the morning, and when it didn't happen, she impulsively went down to the recruitment office, this is 1942, to sign up for the Army. So she just pushed the elevator button to go upstairs to where she needs to go, and says, well, if I'm going to be in trouble anyway, I might as well make it good trouble, she muttered to herself before stepping onto the elevator car, because she has to tell her mom that the thing that she wanted to happen isn't going to happen. And the elevator operator said, what's that you say, ma'am? Grace gave the elevator operator a quick smile as she stepped into the car. She shook her head once in acknowledgement of his question, but said nothing more. She leaned against the wall. She felt her back muscles sigh in relief. It was only when the elevator doors closed that she finally let her shoulders sag. Oh, you know, the usual. What floor do you need? He was a thin, dark-skinned man which reminded Grace of her grandfather from the pictures her mother had shown her. Third, please. He hesitated a moment before pressing the 3 button on the panel. She watched him study her as the elevator creaked its ascent. 3rd floor? That's where those women army folks are. Young lady, it. Grace tensed, not him too. Please don't say it. The old man cleared his throat. I was going to say it would be my honor. Grace felt her face break into a smile. I wasn't expecting you to say that. The receptionist just insinuated that I was a prostitute or something, like I don't have an education or useful skills to offer. Grace stopped. What skills did she have to offer outside of her musical talents and a teaching degree that she had yet to use? Her chin fell to her chest. Never mind, she whispered. Pay that woman no mind. These folks around here aren't used to dealing with someone who looks like you, whose job isn't to clean up after them. The elevator stopped. The door began to creak open. The operator waved a nonchalant hand at her. Folks like them are always going to underestimate folks like us. Now go give them hell. So that's one of the introductions to Grace, one of the main characters.
That's great. And listen, if you have a bad day, just
Mhm.
go enlist.
Yeah, basically.
That's excellent. So how did you come across, again, this is based on true history. How did you come across this story? What brought you to it?
It was this picture, if you guys can see it okay. This came across my Twitter feed about 10 years ago. And I have always been fascinated by World War II and just reading up on it and the Women's Army Corps in general. So when I saw that picture, I was like, what is that? Because I saw Black women in uniform and I could tell it was France, and that's all I knew. So that's basically what I put in Google, Black women, Army, World War II, France, and up popped the 6888. And this unit, this postal battalion that was the only African-American women's unit to go be stationed in Europe. And they went to sort the mail. And then I started learning about the stories of everything they went through, even from the officers in that first class of Women's Army Corps officers, and everything that they went through basically from the beginning of the Women's Army Corps in 1942 to when they finally get to Europe in 1945. And even when they get there to the point where their commanding officer basically had to tell one of the top generals in the ETO, over my dead body, sir, because he gave her an order that went against their mission. So I was hooked, and immediately I had the vision of a story in my head. Basically, it was that the soldiers' last night in New York before they ship out, except I was like, but that soldier is a woman. And then from there, the story kind of built itself.
I love it. And these characters are so amazing. I just want to read a quick Kate Quinn quote, author of The Rose Code. She says, Sisters in Arms is heartwarming but fierce, a novel brimming with camaraderie and fire, starring women you'd love to make your friends. Prickly musical Grace and bubbly privileged Eliza may not make the most natural allies, but it's fight or die when they're thrown together in the Army's first class of female officers and the first Black women allowed to serve the country in World War II. Kaia Alderson's debut is a triumph. That's well-deserved praise.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
That's excellent. So what was it like bringing these women to life in fiction? Like, how did you make that decision versus, doing maybe like a nonfiction title? What drew you to this type of storytelling?
Well, once I started researching them, there's actually a lot of studies and articles and books that were about them in the nonfiction realm. And when I started reading about the issues that they had, just in terms of being women and Black women in the military and segregated army and everything like that, my sociology degree kicked in. So, hey, mom and dad, finally got to use my degree. And so I was able to play around with different issues in terms of women from New York, from the North, having to now go into the South in uniform, what that means, having to go into the segregated army for the first time, or a segregated situation. I was able to play with work issues, things that were still in the play today for women today, or even with the whole, what popped up in the news while I was writing it, where with the bird watchers in New York, where the woman called on him because he wasn't in his place. There's actually an example of that in real life that I was able to put in the book. So I was able to kind of move some things around. So fiction for me was more fun. But there is a long list of resources in the back of the book if people want to know the true stories.
I have a question about the two main characters. So these women are joining the army, first time they can join the army, but also I thought it was so interesting that you would think that they have this shared experience and it's kind of intense, but they kind of don't mesh at the beginning. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, and also some inspiration from your life, that maybe some people that maybe they remind you of.
Well, one thing that happened in real life is, or even now today in the army, is people from all walks of life are just kind of forced together in a barracks and forced to live with each other and basically become brothers in arms, or in our case, sisters in arms. So I thought it was really interesting to have someone who's from a pampered background all of a sudden have all the liberties and luxuries that she's used to stripped away. And then you have somebody who's kind of had to work all her life and it keeps getting these bad breaks. And they're basically thrown together from day one, and they're going to clash naturally. The personalities in terms of my two main characters, the first one that I developed was Grace Steele. Grace Steele, the initial inspiration, I should say, is my great aunt, Carmen, where she's, at least when I knew her later in life, she had a very strong personality, would tell you what she thought. Even on her deathbed, she was telling people exactly what she thought of them. And at her funeral, they played I Did It My Way by Frank Sinatra, and everybody just had to laugh because that was basically who she was. In terms of Eliza Jones, she's our more pampered character. And one detail you'll see in the book is that she's short and she looks young, and people have a hard time taking her seriously. And in that picture, you would see, it's kind of based on my experiences. That was me at 22. And a lot of these women back then were 22. So imagine someone who looked like me back then now being an officer in the army and, you know, forcing a big bulky dude to salute her or something like that. So that's where I got all those ideas, and then just kind of made things up from there.
Love that. Can you tell them about this picture?
Yes, this is it's not graduation day from college, but it's baccalaureate, I think. This is at Spelman College, and Aunt Carmen came down from New Jersey to see me cross, because basically from day one, she liked to brag to her friends that her little niece was at Spelman. And then that is my mom. And there's pieces of my mom's personality in Eliza too, but basically for me to have the nerve to even want to go to an all women's college, those are basically the two women that would have influenced me the most to put myself in a different situation like that.
Oh, very sweet.
Yeah, there's fabulous history, and yeah, it's interesting because people who are writing in are saying, let's see, wait a minute, hang on, there was a question here. Oh, are the characters composites of real women who served?
Yes, a lot of the experiences that you see in the book actually happened in real life. Even the stuff that you think may be too good to be true within the book, or it's just too convenient because it matches real life. I tried, because their story isn't as well known and because they were the only ones to get to go to Europe, I tried to keep at least the chronology and things that happened as true to life as possible. But you'll be able to see in terms of the different character arcs, that's where I use more freedom.
And Charity Adams, like they meet some people that they all recognize in the book.
Yes, there's a lot of in real life people. Charity Adams, we meet her when she's on her way to boot camp as well. And throughout the book, you'll see her rise through the ranks to become the commanding officer of the 6888, who led that unit in Europe. And so it doesn't focus on her so much. If you do want to know more about her, her memoir is out there, One Women's Army, and she goes into more detail than I did necessarily, but it is true. She did stand up to those generals, and she said they wanted her to stop operations so that they could do a parade before them, and she basically said, "No, over my dead body, sir." So that's one of those things. I wish I had known their stories earlier, like earlier in my career in the workforce where I had different situations. Excuse me, I would have liked to have that. Oh, somebody before me had the guts to stand up like that and have a positive outcome. So I love that story.
Yeah, they are so inspirational. And this is a great question from Maureen Roberts, our friend Maureen Roberts. She asked, how extensive was your research of these women, and were you able to talk to any living relatives?
The only living relative that I did speak to is I met Charity Adams' son once, long enough to shake his hand and say, I'm writing this book. I purposely didn't look them up because I wanted to play around with the themes that I had. And there's a lot of forms where they were able to tell their own stories in their own words, and I didn't want to take that away from them. In terms of my research, I got to go to Iowa, to Fort Des Moines, the museum there. And it's closed now, but if you contact them, they can have somebody come open the gate for you and let you walk around and see everything, which was really cool. One of the really cool things that they had on display there, because the museum is split up in two parts, one for the Women's Army Corps, because that was their first training center. And then there's the World War I aspect where all the Black male officers from the Medical Corps trained there. So they talk about those two factions, but they have Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, an original wax copy with the crank up phonograph. And because it's so empty in there, it's in this big room with the wood floors, and the acoustics are amazing. So if you do get to go, I would definitely say that was worth it alone. But we were able to go into their archives, and they opened up the closets, and we could see all the Women's Army Corps uniforms, basically from 1942 to 1978 when they were disbanded. We could see their mess kits, their foot lockers, the pins that they had with the Athena Palace. If you look close enough on the cover, you can kind of see that. I was able to go, we were going through the files, and I was able to see like the menu of what they ate there, which was amazing. I was able to work that in because I, at one point I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to make that up, but I was able to talk about what they really ate. So that was fun. And then I also went to Orangetown, New York, which is about a half-hour drive north of New York City up the Hudson, where Camp Shanks was. And that was the last stop USA, they called it. And that's basically where all the soldiers who were shipped out to Europe had to go while they were waiting for their ships to be ready and the Germans to not be in the water so they could cross the Atlantic. And that was cool. We were able, the librarian there at the Orangetown Historical Archive, she was able to pull out all the camp newspapers from the time period that the 6888 would have been there. So we basically looked from 2 weeks prior to 2 weeks after, so we could tell what was going on. The new pastry shop had just opened. There was an article that even mentioned that the mail was backed up and somebody needs to do something about it. What else did we see? When I was there, it was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and 75% of everyone who participated in D-Day on for the American side passed through Camp Shanks. So they had uniforms, both Women's Army Corps as well as Army. They had letters, examples of V-mail. It was amazing. So we were able to go there. Camp Shanks now is basically a couple air hangars, so it's not much to see, but we were able to go out to Piermont Point, which was a few miles away. So we actually took the roads that the soldiers would have had to march down to get to the pier. And initially it's where they would load onto the ferries, and the ferries would take them down the Hudson to the West Side piers in Manhattan, and they would load on the Liberty ships. But then they were at one point they built it out so that the Liberty ships could come up the river, and they could just go up to Piermont Point and load there. So we were able to get pictures of that and just look at it. And it was a beautiful day. So to think that a lot of these people's last look at US soil before going into combat was something as serene and peaceful as the Hudson Valley River was just amazing.
Yeah, and we have a picture of the kind of before and after, if we can show those. But while Chris is pulling that up, I just want to say that you're going to be speaking at ALA tomorrow.
Yes.
Very excited.
I am.
And they can see all kinds of different photos too. Lots more to go. There's so much to go in this book. Your research was so extensive. I can't imagine how cool that was to just have so many things at your fingertips, newspapers, etc. And so, yeah, that's tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. And I put a link in the chat for everybody. So please go and watch Kaia at ALA. Very cool.
And I go in a little bit more detail about some of these things too.
Yeah.
And the images that you have, I mean, we'll show in one or two, but the images that you've shared with us and that will be in your presentation,
Mhm.
they're astounding. I mean, it's really, you really get a real feel for, just sort of like what was going through, what their everyday life was like before you just,
Mhm.
for a second we put up the menu for, breakfast, lunch, and supper. I love that it doesn't say dinner. The maps where they, just the bus station and then the dock. It's tomorrow's going to be, if anybody can check out tomorrow, do, because you'll see a lot more. As Piermont, upstate New York. It's not even upstate New York, it's Westchester, right? But yeah,
You're looking at the pier.
yeah. Well, we're
Okay.
looking at
Oh, the soldiers coming home. And this particular
yes.
picture is the end of Piermont Point, all the way at the end of the pier where the Liberty ship is dropping them off. This is a unit of African-American soldiers. So you get a sense of how big these ships were. And, part of this was a rural area. So it was like a little fishing pier, if you will, that they had to build out. So there's just people and equipment and material. And then when we went, you could still see remnants of where they had to build out the dock to accommodate the Liberty ships.
I have that image here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. So I'm standing on the main part of the pier that still exists now. And then this was what's left of what they built from the war. And this is, for people who are familiar with the area, this is pointing south, looking southbound on the Hudson River. So you get a sense of this is what those soldiers would have seen, as they ferried down the river and to go out to the Atlantic to go to Europe.
So much
Incredible.
history. My goodness. I
Mhm.
mean, there's so much research.
Mhm.
You learn a lot in the book, and you sort of wrapped it around, spun it around these people, but it all rings so true because you really have drilled down and done your homework. And it's fascinating. And I love the book jacket. Do you love the book jacket?
Oh yeah, this is basically the first thing that they sent. And I was like, oh wow, you guys nailed it on the first try. I loved
Yeah, no
it.
joke.
So thank you to the art direction team at Harper and William Morrow.
I mean, I love the picture of the women, and of course that postmarked
Mhm.
piece of mail that is, the whole
Mhm.
mission, just to keep their spirits up and
Mhm.
in such terrible times. And this is beautiful. It's
Mhm.
beautiful, powerful story. And as I say, it's a history lesson just wrapped around these wonderful characters that you've created.
Mhm.
Like I said, composites of several people.
And one thing that really got to me about how important their work was in sorting the mail is there's a documentary out called The 6888. And at one point, a couple of years ago, they put up a monument to them at Fort Leavenworth. And one of the state senators sponsored that. And he was speaking at the event. And while he was speaking, he just all of a sudden got hit with this emotion because he realized,
Mm.
he's like, my parents were married right after the war, and what kept their relationship going was those letters and the mail. And some of you ladies might have touched those letters, and I exist most likely because of the work you guys did. So just I'm getting the chills even now about that.
Wow.
He was overcome with emotion. So it's a really powerful moment if you do have the opportunity to see that documentary.
Yeah, that's where is that? How can we find that? Do we know?
It's produced by Lincoln Penny Films, and if you go to their website, I think you can get it digitally as well as order DVDs, or if you even want to have an event with them, you can
Oh, I see it.
originate those requests there.
Yeah, I see it right there, 6888,
Mhm.
LincolnPennyFilms.com, and it's the first one listed there.
Mhm.
Fascinating. Chris, do you see it? Maybe you can put it in the thing. Oh, look at this. Yeah, you guys have got to check this out. Um, yeah, that's fantastic if you can pull it up.
I wondered, just because you said
Mhm.
stories that maybe seem too good to be true, and
Mhm.
not to give anything away, but is there
Mhm.
something you learned when you were researching that you're like, this is so crazy, I have to put this in there. Like, no one will believe that happened.
The Nosy Nelly scene on the train, if you've read the book. When I read that, it was just, I had actually read it before all the stuff that happened last year happened, but then when I was rereading it, I was like, oh my God, this isn't anything new, and how it was dealt with by the officials was perfect response. And then what happened after that, I made up just to, put the icing on the cake.
I love that. Well, now
Mhm.
someone they have, if they haven't read the book yet, they have something to look out for.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
super fun.
Mhm.
Carla Sudo asks, what are you working on next?
It was actually announced last week. I was contracted to do a book about the Negro Leagues, and it's going to center on Effa Manley, who was co-owner of the Newark Eagles, and she is currently the only woman who has been inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And no one can say for sure if she is a woman of color or not. I'm pretty sure she is, but you have to kind of dig deep into the research to figure that out.
Wow.
The other thing is, if you can look her up now, and there's books about her, and Harper even has the children's book about her called "And She Loved Baseball." But everybody tends to focus on the baseball part, and actually her civil rights work, even before she became involved in the Negro Leagues and during, is completely fascinating. If you're familiar with the 1930s, there was a campaign called "Don't Shop Where You Can't Work," and specific to her is in Harlem on 125th Street. That's where everybody in Harlem would go shopping, but none of the shopkeepers were Black. They were all white women. And she is basically the one that spearheaded that campaign and forced basically all those merchants to start hiring local people to work. And this is the 1930s, so the Great Depression is going on. So
Wow.
yeah, I am having fun working with Effa. She is a piece of work.
I bet you are. And
Mhm.
that's pretty neat to we'll learn more because of
Mhm.
you. It's pretty
And I'm
wonderful.
happy to do it.
Yeah, well, you know what? Just looking at what you've done with this book, I mean, it's
Mhm.
it's there's a way to that we can all continue to learn, and you educate us on
Mhm.
these moments in history and these incredible characters, these people, these figures that have done so much.
Mhm.
So that is very exciting. Yeah, I
Mhm.
just pulled up She Loved Baseball, the Effa Manley story. Wow.
Mhm.
Okay. Do we
Yep.
have any other? Well, somebody said I cannot wait to read her story. So there you go. That's
Mhm.
awesome. And Chris or Lainey just put it in there. There's the book. It's right in the comments. Lainey, I think did this.
Mhm.
Awesome, you guys.
Yep.
That's
And
great.
speaking of libraries, as soon as I'm able to, Newark Public Library in New Jersey, you'll be seeing me, as well as the Schaumburg in Harlem, and I also Cooperstown. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, you heard it there,
Mm-hmm.
librarians. If you want Kaia and Latanya or Latanya to come to your libraries virtually for now, I suppose, and make an appearance and talk about their books and share these people and these times in history with patrons. Just let us know, because they are happy to come and spread the word. And
Be very happy to.
yeah. So I think we might have one more. Cooperstown. Yes, Barbara Jenko, Cooperstown.
Yes. I've never been, and I was such a huge Yankees fan when I was a teenager.
Uh-oh. Unfreeze. She frozen.
The
Lainey.
Yankees broke things. I think it was, yeah, when she was frozen.
Oh,
She's coming back. Come on, Kaia, you could do it.
Sabotage from the other side. She mentioned the Yankees.
Yeah, she mentioned the Mets would be okay.
So we have a comment here. It says, thank you for writing about women who've been forgotten by history, especially African American women, which I think is really important to say. And I know I was talking to her editor about this book while we're waiting for her to come back a while ago. And she was just saying she hopes this opens up so many other stories of like African American women who did so many great things.
I'm back. Sorry.
Yay!
Kaia, did you hear what Lainey was just saying?
No, I caught the last sentence.
Lainey, want to grab that again?
Yeah, someone wrote, thank you for writing about women who have been forgotten by history, especially African American women. And they said that's super important. And I was just saying, I was talking to your editor a while back before, I think we even had a cover for this book. We were talking, she was just saying how she loved that this book hopefully is going to open up so many other stories. There's so many great stories of African American women, especially in history. So,
Mhm.
so thank you for
I have
writing
a
it. It's
list.
important.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I have a
Mhm.
list of the ones that I'm trying to bring out.
Yeah.
Good. That's great. That's fantastic. So, well, we are at the 3 o'clock hour, and I think we've gotten to all the questions. Janet Lockhart says you're in for a treat when you visit Cooperstown. Lots of Yankees there. It's pretty
Yes.
cool. Yeah, I
Mhm.
went there a long time ago, but it'd be so much fun to go back.
Mhm.
Barbara Junko says yes. Elston Howard.
Yes, he was the first Black Yankee.
You see, librarians,
Mhm.
they're not only our jam,
Mhm.
right, Lainey? They're everybody's jam because you just know it so much. These are
Mhm.
your people. This is amazing.
You're
So,
my people.
well, again, thank you so much for this. And Lainey, do you want to, or Chris, do you have anything you want to say before we, or Kaia, if there's anything that you want to say before we log off and say goodbye? We wish you
Thank you
well.
for having me, and I hope to see you tomorrow at my presentation at ALA. Looking forward to it.
Wonderful.
Can't wait.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for coming to be here today. And everybody can go request an e-galley and get reading. I know that they're excited. And like you said, tomorrow, Wednesday, the 23rd, 12:30 Eastern, come to
Mhm.
ALA and hear from Kaia again.
Yeah, is the link there? Can
Yeah.
we put it in there? Okay,
Mhm.
great. So thank you. Thank you for shedding light. And
You're welcome.
this was wonderful. You're wonderful. Thank you for doing all the
Thank you.
homework.
You're wonderful too.
We get to pass the test because you did the homework. We get to just go, wow, look at that. So
Mhm.
much gratitude to you. And,
No problem. My pleasure.
and yes, and we look forward to hearing about all the other wonderful figures that you will shine a light on in the near future. That's really cool.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for watching today. This was super fun. We'll see you next week. Next week we have Matthew Pearl, who will be with us in the screen, and we'll be updating information on that. But do set your clocks, your calendars, your Facebook reminders for next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Matthew Pearl will be here to talk about his book. Chris, Lainey, do we have anything else to say?
Just that we're glad you
It's
joined
a great
us.
hour.
Yeah.
Seriously. Thank you,
all.
everyone. Thank you,
And enjoy
Kaia.
ALA.
Yes.
Bye.
See you all there.
Kaia, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.